Well, guys, welcome back to the Cycle Sunday podcast. Again, done virtually. I'm down here in Chichester at my home. Paul, you are up in Edinburgh. Do you have sunshine today?
It's not been, but yesterday was absolutely stunning.
Yeah,
And
same
the
here.
amount of people out on bikes and the phones, and the
Yeah.
phones were ringing off the hook. But today, a little bit more overcast, but no, it's lovely, lovely.
Yeah, I plan a trip out on my bike later. Having spent hours trying to replace a tire yesterday. But anyway, I feel tired after watching the video of that fit process. You didn't tell me it was going to basically be a turbo workout.
Well, you did really well.
I didn't sweat or anything.
You didn't sweat, and also wearing a mask because it wasn't. We put the air conditioning on in the showroom to try and keep the temperature down, but we couldn't have it too high because it would have affected the microphones. So to wear a mask and to do the amount of riding that you did and look so composed, you know, you're doing well.
I'm like Roger Federer, basically.
Well, no, more.
But so to this podcast, we have got so much to talk about. I guess the first thing is apologies to everyone for the video being so long, but actually the video was 40 minutes. The whole process was nearly 2 hours. So
Yes.
We did actually quite well condensing the whole process down into just 40 minutes.
Yeah.
And that's why I think of all of the episodes of Cycle Sunday, this podcast is really, there's so many things we could talk about that whole fit process.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I found it a fascinating thing to do. And I've done a fit before. We mentioned it while we were there on my Specialized. And that for me was a real eye-opener. But the thing that really made the fit with you is the fit jig that you've got is an amazing bit of kit.
Yeah, it's fabulous. It really is good.
And one of the things we kind of couldn't really talk about too much in the video just because of time was the actual jig.
Yes.
And I thought it might be quite interesting just to talk a little bit about the jig and just start from the setup process, really.
Yeah.
Because we kind of just mentioned, you've put some details into the computer and it's giving you some stuff to put on the jig, but it's a bit more funky than that, isn't it?
It is, and it's not particularly complicated. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to use it. But from the fit that you had on your Specialized, we still fit customers in terms of when somebody's just been sized. So we've spoken already that we can get somebody's frame size. Somebody sort of new into cycling and they fancy a new bike. It's imperative that even if you're not getting fitted to it, so you're not getting dialed into it, you're on the right frame size of bike. So we can do that relatively easily. And then we have other people who say, maybe after a couple of months of riding it, like you did with your Venge, right, okay, I've ridden it a little bit now. I'm getting a nice feel for it, but I'd just like to be a little bit more dialed into it. And that's where you can do a fit like you did with your Specialized. And we can still fit like that as well. But when somebody wants to be absolutely dialed into a position on the bike, you just cannot beat the jig. But it is a massive investment for the cycle retailer or the fit studio that has one of those, because these things are not cheap.
Yeah. It might be distasteful of me to ask how much a jig like that would cost for the guys watching.
Probably the sort of bottom line of most cycle retailers. Sort of, it's an expensive option to go for.
I'm not going to get it out of him. I'm not. He's being too cool.
No.
A lot of money.
You're going to get your gear ratios out of me before that. Needless to say that we only really adopt the use of the jig, and it is imperative when doing what we're doing with you. So we've got a number of customers at the moment who are going through custom build, but also, as we've said before, we're a Trek Project One centre, and we do a lot of bikes with Trek Project One. whilst Trek uses, the hook to get somebody into Project One with all the different colours that you can go for, we think of Project One slightly differently, because when somebody's looking at a high-end bike, that's sometimes some of these bikes are starting with a sort of 5, 6, 7, 8,000 pounds and above. What you've got to bear in mind is that all of the individual components are very, very expensive. So if you take an off-the-peg bike that's got a £300 handlebar, it's got a £150 stem, your gear ratios aren't absolutely perfect, what you end up with is an off-the-peg bike that is then adapted for you, and you then have a lot of redundant components. We've mentioned that in a previous episode. So the beauty about something like Project One and the way that we're building this bike for you is the fact that with the jig, we can order every single component, from your stem length, your bar width, your saddle width, the crank arm length, the gear ratios, all of those things we can order directly either from our suppliers or directly from somewhere like Trek as a Project One bike. And for just a small uplift in cost, you can get a bike that is absolutely dialed in for you from day one. And that is the benefit of having the jig. So, and what it also allows us to do is save a huge amount of time in the build. And I know it's something that you're wanting to talk about through this episode. But once we've finished your bike fit, we then re-input the new figures, which we'll talk more deeply about in a second, back into the computer, and it uses the geometry programs that's within the software for the jig and delivers me that fit. So if I build your bike with this saddle height, with this fore and aft position, with this crank arm length, with this bar height, with this bar width, what it felt like when you, at the end of this episode, where you said, we've got a fit, yeah?
Yeah.
I can build, or I can't, my technicians can build your new bike to that fit. So how it felt the moment we finished and said, that is where I want my bike, the first time you take your bike out is going to feel like that from day one. Yeah.
So to the computer software that fits with that goes with the fit jig.
Yeah.
I'm presuming you've got every kind of frame type, and I would presume it's just with you, Bianchi and Trek bike.
We've got everybody. So we've got everybody else's manufacturers loaded in there. So let's say we in the future, if we ever went with another brand as well as the brands that we do, we've got all of the information in the system. Yeah.
So you typed in Bianchi Ultra XR4, and then the bit that we didn't see on the video, but I saw off camera, was you then had a set of readouts for all the main bits of the bike: the saddle height, the handlebar height, the little, what was really cool, the little lathe wheels, because people think, well, hold on, when you did fore and aft position, you didn't go up to the saddle and change it on the saddle, but you did. Yes. You just used the little wheel and moved the whole seat post back.
Yeah, correct.
And that for me, I thought that was very, very cool.
Yes.
And then once that's there, then we do the fit and you move things around.
Yes.
And for me, the benefit of that fit process that made it, I feel like, a more impressive and probably an easier for me process was the fact things could be done in real time.
In real time. And that's the big game changer.
You could change a saddle height or a handlebar height literally in real time. So in the video, when we were looking at the height of the handlebars and we had the 10 mil spacer length, so we could adjust it by 30 mil.
Yes.
I just sat up, kept pedaling.
Yes.
3 or 4 seconds of turning an Allen key and the handlebars dropped by 10 mil. And I came back down onto the handlebars and could feel it.
Feel the difference. Yes.
And that for me was the big difference, because if you were to do that on a bike on a turbo, I mean, for example, when I did my bike fit on my Specialized, the big thing we had to change was the stem length. Because the handlebar, because I didn't quite have the right size frame, the handlebars weren't in the right position. Now, the problem on a turbo is you think, okay, I need to change the stem length.
Mm-hmm.
Let's change the stem.
Yeah.
And then you have to take the handlebars off, change the stem and put them back on again. And that takes, I don't know, 20 minutes?
Yeah.
And then you get back on the turbo and then you can't remember what it felt like before.
Yes.
And that fit jig, that I just found it fascinating.
Yeah. Well, if you also think about, and we'll come on to all the settings in a second and just explain that to the listeners. But the thing that you sometimes forget is that on the bike that we're building for you, it's a full one-piece integrated handlebar and stem.
Yeah.
So if I had an Ultra XR4 on the turbo trainer doing a fit, I can't change the bar and stem width. Physically, it's impossible because it's fully integrated. It's one piece. And the handlebar set that you have on your new bike is around 650 quid. So even if
for a set of handlebars, that's more than that's nearly the same as my first bike.
Yeah. So that would effectively mean that even if I could, if it wasn't the fact that I can't take them off because it's got all of your hoses for the brake lines and the wiring for the gear system, even if I could take it off, I'd need to have all the different bar widths with all the different stem lengths in stock to try for you. I'd have 30 grand's worth of handlebars in stock and still potentially not have the right one.
For one bike.
For one bike.
Yeah. So that must be then, there must be then certain bikes like the one that we're building for me, where you have no choice but to have a fit.
Unless,
on the jig.
unless you are, you form a, as we'd spoken about in other episodes, if you're sort of average height, average build, yes, and wants to just start off on a base setting, it is possible to just come in and buy an Ultra XR4 off the peg. We have them on the shop floor at this moment in time. But it's only if somebody actually, is out with those parameters or wants to do a full custom build and wants it to be absolutely dialed in. So it's different ways that you can buy it. And it's exactly the same in the car world. So you could walk into a BMW shop and they might have a really nice BMW M3 with the right colour leather, the right colour exterior. It might not just have the right headlamps and the right sat-nav, but it's good enough. You can take it away in the next couple of weeks. But if you want to be dialed in for that car and you want exactly the right colour, exactly the right spec, exactly the right tyre, exactly the right brakes, then you'll probably have to factory order that. It takes a little bit longer. So you can do bikes in the same way. Yeah. So it's fascinating. It really is. So So with regards to the jig,
so that
sorry. So with regards to the jig, how do we set it up? So the first things first, as we said in the video, we've got to have your pedal, you wearing your shoe, and the saddle that you are going to be taking away. And one of the things that we didn't mention in the video was how we got to your saddle width and the correct type of saddle. But that's another process that we do for you. But then the great thing about the jig is in the saddle clamp on the jig, there is a tiny hole, a viewing hole that we can view through. And every saddle on all of the markers that marks the maximum and minimum amount of rail movement that you have on an individual saddle, at the center point usually has a cross. So you've got lots of vertical lines with your sort of 1 mil, 2 mil changes, but right at the midpoint of that saddle's range of 4.5 movement, there's a tiny little cross, which is your midpoint. So what I do is I put your saddle on and I want to see that cross inside the view hole, and that is the saddle set absolutely at its midpoint. And that means that when I have the component, when I put your inseam into the computer and the frame size that we're going to be working with for your overall height and inseam, it then spits out of the computer what we call the X and Y coordinates. So X and Y is effectively from the center line of the bottom bracket. If you measured horizontally out from the center line of the bottom bracket and then vertically up to the center line of where the handlebars are fitted to the stem,
Gotcha.
that is one of your coordinates. And then likewise, if you measure vertically from the center line of the bottom bracket up and then out to the center point of the steerer, or the top of the head tube as well, that is what we call stack and reach. So, and that is a geometrical shape of a frame, and it also works in terms of the seat angle. So the complexity of somebody putting all of those numbers into the computer to aid the fitter being able to do these easy XY coordinates, that's part of the reason why it's so expensive. The jig, the actual bit of metal, that is expensive, but it's the software, and we have to subscribe to get in. Every year we have an annual subscription, which is not an insignificant amount of money, which updates all of those geometrical shapes and grants us a license and access to all those measurements. And that's how we get that initial that initial sizing.
Do you have to?
Sorry, carry on.
Do you have to? Does it have to know the type of saddle? Because I'm wondering whether there must be a variance in a saddle from the rails to the actual top of the saddle.
Yeah. So this is now where your fitter is really important. So I know on a Bontrager saddle every single Bontrager saddle from the center line of the saddle rail to the, I think in horse terms you call it the sort of withers, effectively where the where the baseline of the saddle and the interconnection point with your pelvis is 35 millimeters. However, on Celitalia, certain versions of their saddle is 45 millimeters. So I have to make that adjustment from knowledge and memory and measurements there. The other thing is that there's various assumptions to the jig. So, for example, the base, every single Trek bike comes with a 20 millimeter rearward offset to the seat cap. So from the center line of the seat post to the center line of the saddle clamp is 20 millimeters offset back.
Yeah.
However, for me personally, I've got quite a short femur compared to my tib and fib length. So to get the correct knee over spindle position, I have to bring my saddle forward to a point where it would have to go beyond the maximum fore and aft position of the saddle to get the correct knee over spindle position, which means that I have to change my seat cap to a 5 millimeter offset. So the center line of the seat cap is 15 millimeters further forward, and then I have to adjust the fore and aft on the saddle thereafter.
Yeah.
And it's also got a lot more assumptions there. So it's assuming certain crank arm length. So I have to make those adjustments for fore and aft as well. And in addition to that, it also assumes on a Bianchi, for example, that it uses 100 millimeter long stem at 7 degrees of angle. So I have to also make those calculations and those adjustments in the fit jig. I then have to think about the reach of the handlebars into the hoods, because because don't forget that SRAM, Campag and Shimano all have different hood lengths. Each handlebar has got a different length from the center line of their handlebar out to where the hoods are fitted. So I have to make all of those calculations before I order all of those parts. Otherwise, the fit that you enjoyed on the jig won't be the fit that you will feel on the bike unless I make all those calculations and know all of those size differentials. It is time consuming, Peter.
I mean, when I was on the jig, you did talk about it being a jigsaw,
yes.
And one of the things I'll kind of, if for the some guys are going to be listening and going, you're talking in millimeters.
Yeah.
Surely a couple of millimeters aren't going to make any difference. And my simple answer to that is, yeah, it does actually.
Yeah.
You'd be surprised.
Yeah.
And even when you were, especially saddle height, when you just adjust the saddle height a couple of millimeters. And it was funny, I was talking to a mate yesterday, and we were saying, how many times have you been out on a bike ride, and you think, oh, my saddle's not quite the right height, and you unclamp it and just whack it up. And the impact that has on the biomechanics of you sat on that bike is enormous.
Yeah, it's utilizing all of your muscle extension without taking you into overextension. And what a lot of people don't realize as well is that you are, as a squishy organic being, you're a constantly moving target for a fitter. So I fitted you today, and we know the right frame size, and ultimately we know all the right components we're building for it. And I'm going to build it as per that those jig measurements. However, if you then turn around to me, Peter, and say, "Oh, right, I'm training for a half marathon. I've done a load of running," it's going to ring a little bit of an alarm bell with me, because the chances are, if you've started doing a lot of running, you might have a little bit of tightness in your hamstrings, for example, which means that your maximum leg extension that you could have achieved before you started doing your run training, your maximum leg extension might actually be a couple of millimeters lower now than it was then. So we would want to work in those adjustments as well. So the most important takeaway from this is that, yes, get fitted properly, enjoy a bike fit, but always remember that you as a rider also have to feel when it's right and wrong. And we mentioned that in the fit as well. We said, right, what I want to do is I want you to, we went from the saddle being too low to you turning around and saying, wow, Flip, that's feeling better, because we raised it slightly. But if you remember, we then made the point of saying, I now want to take you into a point of overextension so you can feel when it's wrong, because you need to be able to feel when it's wrong while you're riding, so you can either contact us and we'll help you work it through, or you'll be able to make that adjustment yourself and go, oh yeah, I know what the problem is. I've just done a half marathon. I need to just drop my saddle height by 2 to 3 mil. Yeah.
I mean, the one that happened to me when I was training to do the Mont Ventoux challenge was through the winter. I did quite a lot of turbo work, and I also lost a lot of weight. So I changed my diet, and I lost about a stone and a half in weight.
Well done.
Which on a bike, the difference that made in terms of my Strava segments was unbelievable. But the thing that was really interesting is I'd done a whole bunch of work on the turbo, didn't do that much road work during the winter because the weather that year was really, really poor. When I went out on the bike on my bench that I was going to do the challenge on, because I'd lost so much weight, I was able to go much lower on the bike and ride on the drops much more comfortably than I could do before, for the simple reason I'd got rid of half of my beer belly. I just had better flexibility.
Well, it's not just flexibility. It's because your flexibility might not have changed that much, but it's just physically your femur was now allowed to go into a zone that it wasn't allowed to go in before, because it was occupied by pie.
and the thing that I mean, we haven't really talked too much about weight in terms of component and bike weight. And I think when we built the bike, one of the things I'd really like to talk about is that, actually, because when I did my fit on my Venge, we needed to change the stem.
Yeah.
And we worked out the size of the stem that we needed to go to. And then the guy, Jack, who did the fit, said, right, now you've got a choice of how much money you want to spend on the stem.
Yes.
Because we've got stems that are made of aluminium, and we've got stems that are
Yeah.
made of carbon fiber, and we've got stems that are
Yeah.
made of other exotic materials, and the price
Yeah.
range was just unbelievable.
Yeah.
And the weight difference between, I don't know,
Mm-hmm.
an aluminium stem and a carbon stem was a matter of grams,
Mm-hmm.
but
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
cost difference was
Yeah.
3 or 4
Significant.
times.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it made me smile because lots of people buy sexy bits for their bike. They'll
Mm-hmm.
buy a carbon fiber bottle cage because it's lighter than an aluminium
Mm-hmm.
one,
Yeah.
and it might save them a couple of grams. Believe me,
Mm.
people, lose a stone in body weight and you'll go faster on your bike.
Yeah.
Because you're
Well,
not carrying a load of lard around.
yeah. Well, do you know what? And I always calculate weight in bikes. So, for example, if you lose a stone, now I'm putting you on the spot here, and you might just have to Google it. But what's a stone in kilos? I can't remember
Uh,
what it.
I'm not sure. I mean,
No,
I dropped 10 kilos, something like that.
you
I
dropped ten
dropped, I
kilos.
went, no, I
Right,
went from just over 90 to just about 81, I think 82.
perfect. So you dropped 9 kilos, right?
Yeah, bike and a
My
half.
bike, my Imonda,
Yeah,
and I've got it on the weighing scales. It's on our portfolio page on our website, and it's there with the build that I did on it, and I weighed it with pedals and bottle cages. My Trek Imonda weighs 6.95 kilos.
so,
Right,
so it's
so
like you riding along with a bike and a half on your back.
exactly. So it's one of those things. Since I did the Marmot, because of how busy it's been in the bike shop and what have you, over the last 18 months since I did the Marmot, I'm now 16 kilos heavier and genuinely fatter
Yeah,
than I was when I did the Marmot. So I have put on, since I did the Marmot, I'd be riding my bike with 2 more of my bike strapped to my back. And that's the best way of thinking about it. If you
yeah,
drop, and your bike, when it's fully built, is going to be, I mean, we'll stick it on the scales, but it's not going to be heavy. It's a big frame size. So don't forget, the smaller the frame size, the less
mm,
material is in the frame. Your bike's going to be, in the sort of eight and a quarter in that region.
yeah,
If I was to sort of plump a figure out of my head, it might be a wee bit lighter than that. But yeah, you will have lost virtually your entire bike weight in that time that you lost the weight that you did. Yeah.
yeah,
So
yeah.
no, if you can lose weight yourself, definitely. But
Mm,
the other thing about the materials that the components and the bike is made from is that so many people, and I think we've mentioned this before, so many people
mm,
focus on weight being the priority number one. But your vast difference between having something made out of aluminium, a lighter weight aluminium, or a good quality carbon fiber. Because always remember, carbon fiber is not created equally, just like aluminium
mm,
is not created equally. There are different levels of carbon. But what carbon has got is a natural vibration reduction quality.
mm,
So good quality carbon will help reduce the fatiguing harmonic vibration that travels from the road up into the squishy organic thing that's sat on the top of it. So if you have a really nice quality aluminium stem, the weight difference between a good quality aluminium stem and a good quality carbon stem might be a matter of not worth the price difference for the weight. But if you're doing 100-mile sportifs on a regular basis, then moving to that good quality carbon stem and carbon handlebar and carbon railed saddle and carbon railed this and that and the other, that could be the difference between
mm,
a rider being totally destroyed at the end of a ride versus getting off the bike and going, I'm feeling okay. So always remember that good quality carbon
yeah.
fiber can also be a fatiguing reduction, not just a weight reduction. So hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah. See, yes, so this is I find this is why we did this series of videos, right? Because I just find the combinations and permutations of choices that you can go into if you want to. And I know we've stressed this lots and lots of times.
Yeah.
Loads of people are going to go into a bike shop, buy a bike off this peg, go away, ride it, and have a lovely time and enjoy it and get out in the fresh air and get exercise, and that's amazing.
You're totally right.
However, when you start to really go down the route we are and want to build something that's really special, the options and the choices and the things, I just find it fascinating.
Yeah.
And I think that let's move the kind of chat on to the bit that so the real-time element of that fit process I found really interesting. However, the bit that blew my mind was just the counterintuitive nature of some of the things that we did.
Yeah.
And how that links to what many cyclists or many people will have done without realizing the consequences.
Yes.
And the two things for me that struck me is the first thing, when I first got on the jig and I started cycling. I mean, actually, I instantly knew my saddle was the wrong height. I just felt it.
Yes,
and we put the saddle to the right height, and we got my fore and aft position above the crank, and we did all of that, and that was fine.
Yeah.
And that got my bottom half of my body set up.
Yeah.
But I then felt that my hands were quite heavy. I could feel the weight of my body pushing down on my hands.
Yeah.
And every ounce of you, when you feel that, thinks, I'm leaning over too much.
Yeah.
So therefore, what I'll do is if I lean back a little bit, and I'll do that by raising my handlebars, it will be more comfortable.
Yeah. Yeah. It's logical, right?
It's logical. And then you went, no, we're not going to do that. What we're going to do is we're going to lower your handlebars.
Yeah.
And you think that shouldn't work. But you lowered them. And initially we lowered them 10 millimeters. And the difference it made was amazing because, as we explained in the video, you're now engaging your core muscles, your core stability of your body.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I instantly felt more comfortable on the bike.
Yes.
Sorry, it can't be comfortable. I felt in a better position on the bike.
Sure.
And interestingly, we then went down even lower.
Yes.
And I would, the amount of people who, even if they haven't had a fit, if they're on the bike and then they feel something like that, they're going to go out and buy a different stem, or they're going to raise their handlebars.
Yes.
Or if their stem's too long, maybe they'll move their saddle forward so that they get closer to the handlebars because it's cheaper than buying a new stem.
Yeah.
And what we now hopefully understand as viewers of our video, and I certainly do, is you run the risk of messing things up royally by changing things without really understanding the biomechanics of you on the bike.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if you are, I guess if you're going out for half an hour on a bike for a Sunday afternoon, just a bit of, it doesn't matter. But if you want to go and do a sportif that's 30 or 40 or 50 miles long or 100 miles long, you're going to realize that it's wrong probably about an hour and a half into the ride when you start feeling really sore.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's really important to understand that, you know, you've got some fitters who, and there's better fitters than I am. You know, we've got.
Don't be so modest.
There are fitters out there. No, but there are fitters out there who are also genuinely qualified physios.
Yes.
You know, so they have the physiotherapy side of their business as well. So it's really important to understand, and it's not self-modesty. It's really important. Is I am not a doctor, I'm not a physio, and I'm not a sports masseur.
Yeah.
These other professions are exactly that. They are professions.
Yeah.
But what I am is I am a trained fitter. I understand if I move this adjustment here, how is that going to affect the biomechanics of the person sat on the top?
Yeah.
And the other thing that I'm also is just experienced and I don't have ego when it comes into it. I do listen to the experience that that individual cyclist has got, because you know, you've been riding a bike, to a good level, as you said, for around sort of 8-9 years, to a good level.
Yeah.
So as a fitter, a good fitter will listen to your experience. You know when something's been right, and you know when something's been wrong. So I'm tapping into your experience as well, and listening to what you're after. But at no time, if I'm doing a fit and I can see there is something that is biomechanically wrong here, you need to go and see a physio, I would have said that to you. Actually, this is there's an issue here that needs to be addressed before we continue. So it's important to understand that distinction. But what a good fitter does is, we just put your bike, or put you into a position on your bike from day one, without you having to go through the process of 2 to 3 months of fiddling. That's what we do. And and it just means that from day one, with your brand new bike, you can go out and ride and do the type of riding that you enjoy. Because how much free time have you had this week, Peter?
None. I haven't even gone out. I haven't even got my turbo. That's how bad it is.
Right. So you are just a typical person who is living in the working world. Your free time is so precious to you that your hobby is cycling. And if you've got an hour to 2 hours a week to go out and enjoy your hobby, do you want to spend 1 to 2 hours of your hobby adjusting something to getting it right? Or do you want to use that hour to 2 hours to get on your bike and just go and enjoy riding it? What's your preference?
I think that's... I think that the thing is, when things aren't right, and one of the things we probably should have a bit of a chat about, and it's related to this, is in the video we talked about fitting cleats and fitting the cleat to the shoe before we got on the bike, and and we that process was, I don't know, half an hour maybe, something like that, to get the cleat on the shoe properly. Now I've had this before where I think I joked in the video, you just hold the shoe up and if it looks about right, you screw it in. But I can remember when I was still quite early into the days of actually having cleats and my shoes actually clipped into the bike. I must have set my cleats just slightly at the wrong angle, and I went off for a bike ride. And it didn't, for the first half an hour or so, there was nothing wrong. I then started to feel a little pain in my knee. And that pain in my knee was because my foot was at the wrong angle, and as you kind of go around the pedal stroke, it just over a process of repetition, it aggravates that knee, and my knee was in bits for ages. And that's the thing, you might not, and certainly when you do a really long ride, and again, some of the guys watching this or listening to this might not have ridden 100 miles on a bike. I would recommend it, by the way. If you're getting into your cycling, one of my goals that I set myself quite early on was I wanted to do 100 miles in a day on a bike. That was kind of... And the first time you do it, firstly, it's exhausting, but it's a brilliant achievement.
It's brutal.
It's like running a marathon, I guess. It would be the same kind of... it's a 7, 8, 9 hours, depends on where you live as to how brutal it is, if it depends on how flat or bumpy it is. But if you're going to ride long distance, if there's something not right with the setup of the bike, you'll find out. Maybe not in the first couple of hours. It comes to you after 3 or 4 hours. And then when it does, if it's wrong, oh my goodness, it can hurt.
Oh, it is like a freight train hitting you.
Especially when you've still got... You look at your Garmin, or you think, I've still got 20 miles or 30 miles to go, and I feel like I'm about to die.
And you're battered. And it's... I mean, the way of thinking about it, if you get into a nice... You get into Charlie Clubman. Right? Charlie Clubman is a lovely place to be.
Yeah.
But if you drive Charlie Clubman or whatever you drive, which is a nice car, and you go and drive Charlie Clubman for 100 miles,
Yeah.
do you sit in the same position and you don't feel as though you want to have a sort of stretch and a move and a stop and a...
Yeah.
No, 100 miles is a long way in a car.
Yeah.
So you now get onto a bicycle where you are now the engine.
Yeah.
You are now sat on a razor blade in a non sort of nice position.
Yeah.
And you now have to pedal yourself for 100 miles. It is a massive achievement.
Yeah,
It is absolutely great. And I really do sort of second what you say. It is a great achievement to go and do 100 miles on a bicycle. It's fabulous, but it's something that needs training for, and it's something that needs just working up to.
Yep.
It is.
And
you don't
important. Need to go and buy a £5,000 bike to do that. You can do 100 miles on a on a £1,000 bike. So,
well, Rosie, my wife, my wife's a teacher, and she works in a high school, and they sort of twinned with a few sort of charities and what have you. And one of those charities did a sponsored cycle ride from their school up to Edinburgh, which was around 65 miles.
Yeah.
Now, at the time, Rosie didn't have her gravel bike. She only had her really nice, very expensive road bike, and a hardtail mountain bike that at the time was still running on 26-inch wheels and very low gearing. And the day that she was going to do the ride, she was going to use the road bike, clearly, because it was a lot of miles and a lot of climbing. But the weather, it bucketed it down, and there was flooding and there was all sorts of stuff. And she said, I cannot use my nice road bike on this. It will be destroyed. So rode that entire ride on a 26-inch wheel mountain bike. And actually, she enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Because she's a strong rider. The people that she was riding with weren't particularly strong riders, so she wasn't having to be pushed too hard.
Yeah.
But your point is absolutely correct. She did 70, 80 miles on a 26-inch wheel hardtail mountain bike.
Yeah.
Would I recommend it? No. But it's possible. And you're absolutely right. You don't have to spend a fortune.
Yeah,
you don't have to spend a fortune.
I mean, it's funny. We might talk about challenges and silly rides and stuff in other podcasts. But when you when you're doing a big ride, I mean, the two that spring to mind, I did the South Downs 100, which is like 100-mile sportive. I did it a few years ago, and about 20 miles in.
Beautiful, was it?
Oh, it's a beautiful ride. It's quite bumpy.
Yeah. Right. Okay.
But about 20 miles in, my freewheel broke.
Oh no.
So I couldn't freewheel.
What, were you spinning fresh air, or was it locked?
It would grab the chain. I thought it was my brakes or my bearings, and then I realised it was the freewheel. So if I took my feet off the pedals and just went along, my crank turned round. So I couldn't freewheel.
Nice.
And I couldn't freewheel for 80 miles.
Oh my goodness! Right. That's like riding a fixie for 80 miles.
It was awful. I tell you, by the time, because even little things like you can't stand up out the seat and just give your bum a rest. It was just horrible. So that was bad.
Yes.
I mean, when you get a mechanic, and there's nothing, there was a bike at one of the feed stops. There was a bike mechanic there, and I said, "Can you?" He went, "You need a new freewheel, mate. I can't fix that." That's like
I'm good, but I'm not that good.
I'm not that good. And I don't have a spare wheel that you can have either. So that was bad. That wasn't a good day. And then the other one, in terms of pain, I did the Paris-Roubaix Sportif, which is a ride. And I did that on my aluminium bike. I got it adapted for Paris-Roubaix. I put big 28-inch Roubaix tyres on it and double bar
28 mil.
A 28-inch, no, 28-inch. They were massive. 28 mil.
Yeah.
and double bar tape, and that was, and it was funny. I remember because that's what is it? It's 90 something miles or something, but a lot of it's on the pave. And the first few cobble sections, I remember talking to one of the guys who'd not done it before. I went, "This is all right," because I trained really hard for it. I was really fit. I went, "This is all right." This.
Yeah.
Anyway, by the time we got to like 2 or 3 sectors of pave left, I was literally screaming in agony when we were going. It was so painful. So coming back to the whole fit thing, the counterintuitive thing, I just found fascinating. And then the last bit to mention maybe was the last bit of the fit process was when you then dropped me all the way down, and then you said, "Look, you're running out of movement
in your hip flexor.
Hip flexor. Let's shorten your cranks." And I'm like, "Really?" And the difference that made was weird. But it's not something that. Well, first of all, I guess if you were dialing in an off the peg bike, to say shorten your cranks on a turbo trainer, you couldn't do that, because to change the crank,
no, but you couldn't do that.
2 hours.
Well, it would, but the other thing that you've got to bear in mind as well is that that's a whole new chain set.
Yeah.
So it completely changes the price point of the bike that you're looking for.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that fundamentally is the benefit. When you're at a point where you go, I want to be dialed into a bike and I want to invest in a really high-end bike, then going down things like Trek Project One and custom build is then worth it to you, because you're ordering all of the components at all the correct shapes to fit you. Because you're absolutely right. If we were just doing an Ultra XR4 or the equivalent bike off the peg in a size 61 centimeter that you're riding, it would come with the crank arm length that suits the global average. So it would either come with a 172.5 or 175 mil crank. Well, if you're looking at a high-end bike, as a dealer, I can't take those cranks off and then just resell them, because they're already fitted and they're what we call an OE, they're original equipment. So this is where we talk. You'd end up with redundant components that you're then having to yourself put on eBay. So sometimes then the cost
and you're never going to get the money back.
Yeah, no, you're never going to get the money back. So it's at that point where we want to give people the right advice to say, actually, for your fit and your shape, we can go with an off-the-peg bike, because there's very little that we'd need to be changing for your fit, just maybe 1 or 2 components that still works out a better cost base compared to doing a custom build. But then when we get somebody in who is, actually, we'd need to change that gear ratio, we'd need to change that bar, we'd need to change that stem, we'd need to change that crank arm. At that point, we just go, do you know what? We need to build a bike from the ground up for you. It's going to be better value for money for you. Yeah. And that's just, again, more experience, more advice.
Yeah. I like watching YouTube videos where they get to look at the tour riders' bikes and they talk through the spec of the bike.
Yeah.
And you hear that and you think, oh, they've got shorter cranks or this stem length. And you think, really? Really? Does that make all the difference? Well, having now had a bike dialed into me and having changed the crank length, because I would have said to you before this process, changing a crank arm length by 2.5 millimeters is going to make zero difference to me. It's just not, it's too, and even somebody watching the video or listening to this podcast will think 2.5 millimeters is nothing.
Oh, yeah.
But as you said, it's not 2.5 millimeters. It's actually 5, because it's 2.5 millimeters on each crank.
Yes.
And it made a huge difference.
Yeah.
And
no, it does.
So
make that
that's the bit for me. I just find it fascinating that such minute differences, and I can't now wait to get that bike on the road and ride it. It's going to be super exciting.
Yeah. And the really thing, exciting. I think that's the other thing that's really important as well is for somebody who turns around and says, but I don't want to spend the money that you're spending, so I can't change the crank arm length. So what can I do? Well, there is another option. You can stretch more. So we needed to change your crank arm length, and we had the ability to change the crank arm length because of your hip flexor. But it doesn't mean that you can't go and do some yoga sessions or some stretching sessions and increase your flexibility.
Yeah.
So it's not just a case of everybody run out and go and get new chain sets and new dialed in bikes and go and spend 8 to 12 grand on a brand new bike that's dialed into you, because not all of us can do that. But there are things that you can do yourself to your own body to get to a point where you don't have to go and do that. Still, ultimately, it would be the best fit for you, but we don't have to go and spend a fortune to do it.
Yeah. No, that's very cool. I mean, I can't wait to watch that bike being made.
Yes,
because I just think and I think that will be the kind of, because all we've said is that we've got these measurements, you give them to your fitter, and off he goes and builds the bike.
Yeah.
But I'm fascinated to see how those measurements are implemented in the bike build.
Yes. Yes.
And I have to. I'm fascinated just generally about watching that bike being built anyway, especially the cockpit area, the integrated stem and bars and all the internal cabling and stuff. Because for me, that's what makes that bike so special.
Yes.
And I guess we haven't mentioned this. You can get an Ultra XR4 without that integrated handlebar, right? You could have a normal handlebar.
You can. So what Bianchi have done, because it is quite an expensive option to have the bar and stem combination. So what they've done is they've created exactly the same frame, but FSA, who is the maker of this particular bar and stem, have done an aluminium bar and stem option in a two-piece. And you can also get a carbon bar option as well if you wanted to do like a midpoint. So you can be alloy stem with a nice carbon bar that still has all of the porting to be able to feed all of the all the hoses and cables in integrated. So you get this really nice finished look. I think it saves about sort of 600 quid in that region from the price of the frame set, which it's not short change. But the other thing as well is on the bar and stem combination that you've got. A lot of people, they do buy sort of Trek Madone and which is Trek's equivalent to the Ultra XR4, and they use those bikes for things like doing an Ironman. So for somebody who hasn't got the space or hasn't got the money to buy a specific TT bike, and a TT bike is what you see on the tour when they've got very pointy helmets and skin
love a
suits.
TT bike, but you just look like a plonker riding one unless you know what you're doing.
Yeah, and they're horrendous to build. but that aside, so for somebody who hasn't got the space or hasn't got the cash to have a really nice sort of bike that we're building for you and a TT bike, what you can do is you can fit sort of clip-on handlebars to your handlebar set that allows you to get into a slightly lower position. You can get draft legal versions of those as well. So it just allows more and more options for individuals to come and get a bike specific to their needs. So it's fascinating.
Yeah, I know when I did a triathlon, I put clip-on aero bars on my Giant, and the difference it made was just, in terms of flat speed, was just unbelievable.
Yeah,
you could get. I mean, it was really difficult to be in there for long as a position. To get. And I think I didn't have it fitted. I just bought a set of clip-on bars from eBay and stuck them on, and I'm sure biomechanically it was horrendous. But it looked really good when I did I'm there. I've got a picture of me going down the embankment in London like this, and I look like Bradley Wiggins. But
did you?
Biomechanically, it was terrible.
You looked like Bradley Wiggins, did you?
Mate, I did a good time. I did.
Did you?
I was all right.
Yeah. I'm proud. So, no, and the other thing that you've got to bear in mind as well, just putting a set of clip-ons onto a standard road bike, again, biomechanically, a TT bike is a completely different geometrical shape to a road bike. So there's a whole lot that goes into this.
Yeah, I mean, I must say that like if you look at the kind of Ironman triathlon bikes with the integrated bottles and stuff, they look amazing.
Oh, they do.
They really do look cool.
Just a weapon.
They're really, really, really cool.
Yeah.
So I think in my ultimate bike garage, one day I would love to have a time trial bike. I don't do time trials, and I don't do Ironman, but that's not the point. They just look cool.
Yeah.
But yeah, so let's just kind of concentrate on this bike before we put the N+1 on it.
Yeah, go too far.
So the fit jig process, and I mean, I'm hoping that people have kind of found that really interesting, because I certainly did.
Yeah.
And I know we've mentioned it already, but I'll finish off by mentioning it for you, is that whole process is a costly and timely thing to do.
Yes.
And therefore, and you might not put it this bluntly, but you have almost like a cost-benefit analysis to do when you consider doing one of those. And if someone was going to come in and buy £1,000 off-the-shelf bike, you're unlikely to spend that time and effort in doing a fit. And if they haven't bought the bike from you anyway, you're definitely not going to do it.
Correct.
So and having done that process now, I understand why, because we were up filming and we were filming. And so it takes a little bit longer, but it was still a good half a day by the time we fitted the pedals and did all the other things that we needed to do. It's a long process, and that takes you out the loop in the bike shop for quite a long time. However, if someone's buying a really nice bike and they want the ultimate, if you like, concierge experience, then I can't recommend it highly enough. It was a I think you get to know your bike better. I think you get to understand the bike. You get to understand you as a cyclist better. And ultimately, you'll be able to utilize that high-end bike that you're buying to do more cool stuff, like long rides, challenges, whatever it might be you want it for.
Yeah, no, it's really kind of you to say. And we also had fun, right?
It was good. It was.
Yeah.
It still freaks me out, the counterintuitive bit of it. But it was great. It was a brilliant process.
Yeah, and for me, it also cements that relationship as well, and that sort of trust between what we're doing for you and me understanding you as a cyclist as well. And it really builds relationships, and that's what we love about it. But you're absolutely right. We could only achieve that level of fit because of also the experience that you've had in cycling as well. So no, it was very good, and I thoroughly enjoy doing them. They're absolutely brilliant to do.
They're very insightful.
Yeah.
So the next episode of Cycle Sunday is. I was really looking forward to the fit, but I was really looking forward to choosing the group set and choosing the componentry on the bike. Yeah. So the next episode, we're going to go into all the ins and outs of if you like, the oily bits that go on the bike. The chain set, the derailleur mechanism. Do I go mechanical? Do I go electronic shifting? Do I go disc brake? Do I go rim brake? All of those. Do I go SRAM or Campag or Shimano? That's the subject of the next podcast.
What my gear ratio is going to be. All those questions.
Like you're going to tell me that. So hopefully, guys, you've enjoyed this podcast. Again, Paul, thank you for your time. It's been a really good one to kind of talk through the details. And still in my head, I don't understand how some of those things work, but I just trust you that they do.
Sure.
But don't forget, guys, please make sure to subscribe to this podcast. If you haven't done so already, just click the subscribe button. That will keep you up to date with when each episode drops. It's dead simple, though. 6 o'clock on a Sunday evening for the podcast. But what you want to do is make sure you watch the video first.
Yes.
Which will drop at the same time, 6 o'clock on a Sunday on the Petroped YouTube channel. Check out Criterium Cycles. It's super easy. criteriumcycles.co.uk. Brilliant website. Lots of videos and stuff on there about everything from looking after your bike to sizing your frame. And obviously lots of sexy pictures of your stock and stuff as well.
Indeed.
So I will. I think we should sign off there. But
brilliant,
Paul. I'll see you on the next episode.
You will.
Have a good day. I'm off to go and ride my bike.
Are you?
And hopefully not. Yeah, maybe mountain bike. I'm gonna go mud plug in today, though.
Oh, that'd be nice. That'd be nice. Yes. Get the
See you on the next episode.
Yeah, everybody ride safe.
Right, guys. Yeah, ride safe, guys.